Good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Kozlowitz. I'm on the marketing team here at Greenhouse Data. Thanks for joining us. Happy Friday. Hope you're all ready to learn some about security in Azure. And I'll be real quick with our introduction today. We've got a lot to cover. So we're going to have Aman Sharma, who's one of our Microsoft experts, speaking. So just a quick introduction about Greenhouse Data. We focus on operationalizing innovation. So we are a platform agnostic managed IT service provider. We're very focused on Azure, VMware Cloud, data center services. Our goal in the end is to simplify your IT operations. So whatever you're trying to accomplish, whatever your IT initiatives, we can help you reach those goals. We have over 70% of our personnel in technical and client-facing roles, so we can support businesses of any size, and we have a number of strategic alliances with service providers, consulting organizations, and industry experts. So we're ready to put together a team that has the knowledge that you need. As I mentioned, we're platform agnostic, so we can work with really any technology that you have in your stack. We primarily focus on mid-size, large private and enterprise organizations. We have locations, both data center facilities and offices throughout North America, and our clients are located all over the globe. We're a service-driven organization, so we're very hands-on. We're very responsive. We provide multi-cloud management, professional services, DevOps, data center, and all the way up through your applications as well. And we wrap that all with a managed services approach. So as I said, we have a lot to cover. There's security, obviously, is a pretty broad topic. So quick rundown on our agenda. We'll go through a sample scenario and get some quick questions. Azure AD, how do you provide conditional access to your users? Azure Security Center overview, various other considerations, and then we'll have answers at the end. Also, please feel free to ask questions at any time. In case we happen to run over or if you need to jump off, we will be sending out a recording of this webinar, so don't worry about missing out on anything. We'll also have Aman's contact info, so if you have questions, feel free to reach out directly to him. Aman is the man, Aman Sharma. He's a Microsoft Azure MVP and a published author. He's also a principal technical consultant here at Greenhouse Data, focused on development and infrastructure. We've got his contact info here. We'll throw this up again at the end in case you have any additional questions. So without further ado, I'll hand things off to Aman, and he can get things rolling.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Joe. I have started sharing my screen. Let me know if you can see this.
We can see you.
Perfect. So security in Azure, I'll dive right into it. It is a pretty daunting topic. It's very vast. It encompasses multiple different tools and constructs that you have in Azure through which you can provide security. You can make your environment more secure. So to understand all that without the complexity, or to try to reduce the complexity, what I've done is I have come up with a scenario, and we'll see how we can make this particular scenario much more secure. And through this particular scenario with a real live example, we'll try to understand the security in Azure. Let's say you have a web app service. That is, you have a website through which the end users, they come in and they upload some files, let's say some JPGs, some kind of image files onto that website. Now those images, they are uploaded onto a storage account in your application. And then the files are picked up by a function app. The function app processes those files and uses a couple of virtual machines and runs a batch process on those virtual machines, which processes that image file. Once all that processing is done, the result is stored onto an Azure SQL database, and the result is reported back to the end user. So this will be our scenario, and then let's talk about some of the security related questions as pertaining to this particular environment. So this enterprise grade application, this all sits in Azure with your web app, storage account, your function app, your infrastructure, which is your virtual machine, including the virtual network with those virtual machines, your Azure SQL database, all sits in Azure. Now, let's say you hire a DevOps consultant to work on this particular environment. Let's say you hire Emmett. Being a happy-go-lucky folk that he does not mind to share his credentials with the other guys. So let's say his account gets compromised. How can you try and minimize the access? How can you try and ensure that he has access only from the allowed devices and locations? So how can you secure the access to the whole environment? Question number 2. Let's say you have the whole environment. Now, you want to inspect the security posture of the whole environment. It encompasses so many different tools. There are platform as a service. There is, with all these services, there is infrastructure as a service in the picture. There are so many different types of resources that you have in here in your solution. Is there any single pane of glass, just like Solomon's Palantiri, the magic crystal ball, through which you can see the whole security posture for each and every resource in your environment? Question number 3. How can you ensure that each and every resource security is strengthened? How can you ensure at the granular level that the web app is secure, the storage account is secure, your function app, your infrastructure, your SQL database, each and every resource? How can you go at the granular level to inspect the security and strengthen the security of each and every resource in your environment? Another question. Let's say you hire Emmett as your DevOps consultant. Then you hire somebody else to be the SQL developer. So how can you ensure that the second consultant that you hire, they get access only to the SQL database? How can you restrict the access to particular resources so that they do not have access to the other resources on which they should not have access to? Question number 5, you have secret information. When you will be building applications, you will have secret informations like username passwords, your SQL connection strings, your certificates to access the application. So is there any vault in Azure, any secure place in Azure where you can store the sensitive information? And the final question, lately we have seen that there had been many ransomware attacks. So is there any construct in Azure that can help us prevent those ransomware attacks? Or if not prevent, then how can you ensure that you can recover from those ransomware attacks? Let's try to find the answers for these questions. For the question number 1, how can we limit access to the whole environment? When you hire DevOps consultants, when you hire vendors, how can you limit the access? How can you ensure that they have access only from the devices that you allow? They have access only from the locations that you allow. So the answer for that is through identity and access management in Azure. There is a construct called conditional access in Azure Active Directory. You can leverage that. With every Azure subscription, there is a AD tenant linked to that particular subscription. Now, through that particular Azure Active Directory tenant, you have the construct to configure the conditional access. So the users can access your organization's resources using the devices and apps from anywhere today. This is the world of mobile first, cloud first scenarios. You can no longer limit your end users, your consultants to be only in the restricted environment, only behind a firewall. You have to focus on from where a resource can be accessed. So who can access a resource is not sufficient anymore. You have to consider into the picture from where the access is coming in. This acts as the first line of defense. If you are building that enterprise grade application that we talked about, this is the first line of defense that ensures the security in access to the environment itself. So I'll jump right into the first demo of this particular session, and let's see how the conditional access works in the real life scenario. So here I am logged into the Azure subscription as an administrator. So now this is my whole subscription. This is my whole environment. And as I said, every Azure subscription has an Azure Active Directory instance, which is called a tenant linked to that particular subscription. So with this particular subscription, I want to ensure that the access to my environment for the vendor that I have hired is through the approved locations, to the approved devices only. So what I do is I go to the security section. This is the section I'm interested in for the whole Azure Active Directory identity and management. In this particular section, we'll look at the conditional access first, and then we'll look at what are the other options that are here. Once you know the security options that are available to you from Azure Active Directory perspective, you can strengthen the access to the whole environment. So let's look at conditional access. So in here, what you can do is you can create new policies. The policy is the crux of the conditional access. What policy uses, you can configure that in here in the further subsection of the conditional access. So how will a policy look like? I'll create a new policy. So let's say I name the policy as restrict access. I can select individual users and groups. I know I hired somebody with the name of Megan Bowen. So I'll select that particular user. And then now, if you have multiple apps in the cloud, you will select your particular apps to which you grant or block the access. You can create multiple policies. The policies are of two types. One, you allow the access. Second, you block the access. So as a best practice, what you do in the production scenario is you block the access to everything and only allow the access to the apps and to the environment only which you want to allow. So in here, I will say that I want to configure this particular policy pertaining to all the cloud apps, because this is going to be a deny policy. That is, I'm going to deny the access based on certain conditions. Now, what can those conditions be? Now, this is the crux within the policies inside conditional access. You can configure sign-in risk. So you can configure that if the sign-in risk is high, medium, low, it will not be tolerated in your environment and that it will be blocked later on. You can configure the devices. You can select the platform. You can select the devices. You can even not just include the devices, you can even exclude the devices from this particular policy. You can select the device platforms, and then you can select which one you want to exclude, and then hit done. For now, I'll not configure this policy. Similarly, you have the location. You can configure the trusted location. You can configure any location. You can even select the locations. You can provide the name of the locations. You need to configure the locations first. MFA trusted IPs, this is a location that Microsoft, through its advanced threat analytics and machine learning algorithm, they keep on storing what are the trusted IP addresses that you have configured in your MFA, as well as what are the trusted IPs that are not known malicious IP addresses. So you can configure that if access is coming from those, not from those particular IP addresses, if the access is coming from some of the trusted IPs, then that will be allowed. For now, I'll not configure this as well. Client apps, if you have configured any apps, then you can say that, okay, this can come from a particular mobile app. If that particular app is used to access your environment, then you can allow. Or if it is coming from a browser, then the access will not be allowed. Lastly, the devices themselves. What are the state for the devices? You can configure that. You can configure more device states. Once you do that, they will all appear here. And then you can see that if only the approved devices, for them, you can configure the policy, or you can deny the policy for unapproved devices. So I'll hit done. And then this is where you specify whether you want to grant the access or you want to block the access. If I say block the access, that means what I'm saying is for the user selected, that is Megan 1, for the condition that if the risk is high, medium, or low, then the access should be blocked. If you are writing a policy to grant the access, you can specify that you grant the access, but require them to go through MFA, that is multi-factor authentication. If you, by now, I trust that everybody knows what MFA is. In general, multi-factor authentication is when you provide username and password. The username password is no longer sufficient. You need to provide additional piece of information to authenticate yourself. That additional piece of information could be a code in an SMS on your mobile phone. It could be a call to your mobile phone. It could be an app password. There are multiple options that you can configure with multi-factor authentication. It is always a best practice to have MFA configured in your environment. For now, I'll set this to block the access. And then you can configure the sessions as well. So you can set whether you want to enable the policy or you want to disable the policy. I have already created and enabled the policy since it takes some time to apply this policy. This is the demo policy I have already configured with the user as Megan, the condition as the 3 risks, and the grant set to block the access. Now let's see this policy in action. So this is my Azure environment. I was logged in as admin. I'll go to the Edge browser and try to access the browser as the user Megan. And I should be allowed access into the environment. I am coming from valid scenario. There is nothing wrong. So it just says that the session has timed out. So I need to navigate to the portal and sign in again. And as you can see that I was able to log in into the portal as I'm coming from a valid application. Next, what I'll do is I'll launch a Tor browser. If you don't know what the Tor browser is, Tor browser is an anonymity browser. It hides you behind a complete circuit, and I'll show you that circuit. It hides you behind a circuit. It makes multiple hoops to navigate to a portal so that they don't know from where you are coming. So let's say I navigate to the Azure portal. So the Tor browser will always be slower than your regular browser because it is making multiple hops. It's going from one location to another, to the third location to the fourth, and then accessing the actual Azure portal. If you click on the eye icon, the information icon, it will actually show you the whole circuit. It shows that I'm right now in the Toronto location. From there, the request is going to the United States location. From there to Bulgaria, to France, and then from France to the Microsoft actual portal, that is the Azure portal. So now Azure is smart enough to understand this. They know that the access is coming from behind an anonymized circuit. So it will deem this as medium risk event. And then when I will try to access the portal using the user Megan, it will block my access. I should get some kind of a message. It says that you cannot access this right now. Your sign-in was successful, but does not meet the criteria to access this resource. So this is what is blocking that access. The conditional access that we said, because this is generating, the request is coming from behind an anonymized circuit, as we saw from the circuit itself. So in the Azure portal, Azure understands this and they raise a medium level risk event, and the access is blocked for this particular user. Now let's go back to the administrator view. Now in here, I can go to risk events, and I can see the actual risk events that were happening. It says that the detection type is real time. There has been some sign in from anonymous IP address. I can click on that and I can see there were multiple users who attempted that. And this one, Megan Bowen, this is the one that we try to do. So you can see that this is a location in France from where the actual request was coming in. This is actually an older one, an older entry, but it will appear here. It shows these two users as the active ones coming behind an anonymous IP address. The one that we just made, that will also appear here in short time. But this is where you can see the access, and then you can even drill further into that particular security level event. What happened? What were the different events related to that particular user? And if you want, you can reset the password right from here, or you can dismiss the event if you know that they were the actual user who were trying to do something like penetration testing. So you can dismiss that event as well. The other options in here, it reviews the security posture of your Azure Active Directory and then gives you an overview of the whole environment. It shows you if there has been any risky users. It allows you to create the risky user policy, which user is considered a risky user, and then even block their access. Microsoft uses a securing system, a scoring system. So it gives a secure to each and every security postulate that you implement in your environment. For example, if you have not required your AD privileged users to have MFA enabled, so it will deduct that score from the total overall score limit, which is in this case 223. So if you enable MFA in your environment, it will add 50 score to the whole score tally. So the overall score, it gives you an idea where your environment is, how secure your environment is. MFA is where you set up a whole multi-factor authentication, and then users who were reported in the risky events, who are flagged for the risk, they will all appear here. You can take action related to those users all from one place. So this is how you secure the access to the environment itself. If there are any questions, feel free to show them to us in the chat. So next, I'll jump onto back to the presentation. And I'll move on to the next section, which is Azure Security Center. This is the main section. It gives you insights into the whole security of your environment. Not only that, it lets you drill deeper into individual resource level. This is Solomon's Palantir. This is the magic crystal ball using which you can see the security posture for your whole environment. So Microsoft recommends that you should go through three different processes. One is you should put the proper controls in place to protect your environment. Next, if there is any security level event, you should be able to detect that. And finally, you should be able to respond to the event so that any further security events could be avoided. For example, if a virtual machine in your environment is compromised, you should be able to limit access to that virtual machine from the rest of the environment. What happens in the actual world is the attackers, they try to find out any loophole, and once they do, let's say one VM is compromised, they will use that particular virtual machine and then initiate the attack from that compromised resource to compromise further resources in your environment. So once you detect that something wrong has happened, it is critical that you respond and close the gap right then and there so that further environment is not compromised. And then you go into the cycle, you learn from the mistakes, you ensure that that does not repeat by protecting the environment further, and then you go into the detection mode again. So what actually is Security Center? This is the slide from Microsoft. Security Center is all about three things. It is about unified visibility and control. It gives you visibility in your whole environment. When I say whole environment, I do not mean just the Azure environment. It gives you visibility into your on-prem environment. It provides with adaptive threat prevention. We'll see what that means. And it provides with intelligent detection and response. Microsoft has so much machine learning going on. They get data from multiple third-party providers like Checkpoint and Barracuda. They get the information from there. They have their own database of what are the different malicious IP addresses, what are the different patterns that look like that they could be attack into your environment. They use all that information to intelligently detect whether there is some attack going on in your environment. So let's look at these three constructs in detail as pertaining to Azure Security Center. So it is built into Azure. There is no setup required. You can get insights from your hybrid resources. That means you can not only maintain the security of the Azure environment, you can maintain the security of your on-prem environment. You can monitor and maintain the security of your third-party systems like AWS. You can get the visibility into AWS as well as any other systems, and then get the insights in one single pane of glass. This literally is Saruman's Palantir for all intensive purposes, as far as security is concerned. You ensure compliance and policy management as well, not just the security. So it conforms to multiple standards, and Microsoft boasts that they are the only cloud provider to give you the security recommendations based on the compliance policies. So for example, ISO 27001 certification, if you want to ensure that your environment conforms to that, you can ensure that the compliance and policy of your environment conforms to those standards. If it does not, it will show you, which we'll see in the demo shortly. You can gain deeper insights with integrated log analytics. You can delve deep into the data itself of, let's say, if a security event occurred, you can delve deep into the data. What were the logs? You can use log analytics, which is an offering under operational management suites. It is the heart of Azure Security Center. This is how it collects the data using Microsoft Monitoring Agent. It collects the data from your whole environment in one place and then uses that and multiple machine learning algorithms and advanced threat analytics to give you the insights. You can analyze the security information from a variety of sources, not just from Microsoft sources. You can get the security information from third-party CMs as well. Second, as we saw, it provides with adaptive threat prevention. These are the advanced features that it provides. It identifies and remediates the vulnerabilities quickly. It not only gives you what is wrong with your environment, it also gives you an option of how to rectify that and make your environment more secure. It has a couple of advanced controls. One of them is just-in-time VM access. Through this, you can block all access to your VM and only open the access that is required for a particular time period. And then again, it goes back to blocking the access at all time. Any critical resource, any critical virtual machine in your environment hosting sensitive data should have just-in-time VM access configured on it. Through this, you can say that, okay, RDP is open to this VM only for the duration of next 2 hours. After that, it will automatically go back to being blocked. Adaptive application controls is through which you can detect what are the applications running on your virtual machines, and then you can block unwanted applications. You can whitelist the applications that you deem are should be allowed in your environment. There is third control that Microsoft has recently added. We'll look at that control. It is a file integrity management or FIM. Through that, you can see that the whole operating system of your virtual machine environment, whether the integrity of that is maintained, that there are no malicious malwares or other worms coming in or viruses coming in and compromising the integrity of the file system. Lastly, intelligent detection and response. So there is built-in intelligence and advanced analytics. So it provides you with threat intelligence. What are the different threats to your environment? It provides you with anomaly detection. Anomaly is like I access the environment from one location, and within the next hour, let's say I access the environment from Toronto location. Within the next hour, I access the environment from, let's say, France location. How can I go from Toronto location to France location in an hour? So it detects that as an anomaly in your environment. Similarly, it has multiple algorithms to detect different events as an anomaly in your environment. It detects different behavior and look for different patterns and look for known patterns that are known to be associated with certain attacks. It has partners ecosystem built in where the information is coming from different security partners, as we discussed, and a lot of fusion built in, the data coming in from different sources gelled together into one single system. So when an attack happens, there is a whole kill chain. How did the attacker reach where the attack is happening right there? So Security Center not only just help you with detect the threat at one instance, it detects the threat across the kill chain. How did the attacker reach where they are right now, where the threat event is occurring? So the whole kill chain, it detects and tries to mitigate that. You can visualize the source of attacks with an interactive map, and you can focus on most critical threats. You can quickly assess the scope and impact of the attack. Not only that, you can automate and orchestrate common security workflows. So, for example, something happens, the email should be sent to the administrators, and the user whose account was used to access the resources in that particular security incident, they can automatically be blocked or they can automatically be suspended uh, using the automation via Azure Logic Apps. This brings us to the second demo, which is the bigger demo of the whole session and the last demo as well. So I'll go into my environment. Here I'm in the subscription, which has all the resources that we talked in the earlier scenario. I have the function app, I have the web app, the website. I have the different storage accounts where the file can be stored. I have multiple virtual machines in the environment. And finally, I have the SQL databases in the environment as well. So how can I ensure the security of all of these, the whole environment in total, as well as the individual resources at the granular level? Now, this is the security center. If you will not find it here, you may need to go into all services and then search for the keyword security. Once you see the security center in here, click on the star icon to pin this to your favorite section, and then you can move it around as you want. For this demo, I had pinned it to the top, and this is the security center. In the overview screen, it shows me the whole picture in one glance. It shows me the policy and compliance. It shows me the resource security hygiene. If there are any security event, active event happening, then it shows me the threat protection as well. So for policy and compliance, it shows me what is the secure score. This is the same securing system that we saw earlier at the Active Directory level. This is at the whole subscription level, that it is scoring the whole subscription from the security perspective. Seems like right now we are up to 50% secure as per Azure. And then it shows me what are the different standards, the SOC TSP, ISO 27001, PCI DSS 3.2. If you know what those compliances are, these are the ones that will be interested, that will be of interest to your CTOs, to your security consultants. So you can showcase these compliance regulatory standards to your security administrators, and then show them how through Azure you can do everything from one single pane of glass. Subscription coverage, I only have one subscription, but you can cover multiple subscriptions using one single security center. At the bottom, I see resource security hygiene. It shows me where the security is, or how much resources or how much recommendations are high severity that I need to take action right now, how much are medium severity, and how much are low severity. Let's dive deep into the whole both of these sections, that is policy and compliance and resource security hygiene. Before that, to get you started into the security center, you will need to install the agents. That is the first and foremost thing. You need to have Microsoft monitoring agent on the environment that you want to monitor. The PaaS environment, for example, storage account, app services, SQL databases, the information for that comes automatically into the security center. But for any virtual machine in your environment, to monitor that, to monitor the security events inside that, you need to install Microsoft monitoring agent. And once you configure here, automatically the agent installation can be enabled from this particular screen. If you are just getting started with the Azure Security Center, I recommend that you come here and navigate to the different sections in here to know more about the Security Center. Next, we'll jump into the policy and compliance section. We'll look at what is the coverage. The coverage is the subscription that you have selected. You can select multiple subscriptions in here. You can view the score that we saw earlier, and then you can go into the each and individual category, or you can navigate to the whole score. You can click on individual category and see what makes up that score and what you are missing on, how to add to that score. So for example, I'm in the compute section. These are the different policies or different recommendations that we are missing right now. This is the overview screen, so we are looking at all the resources. Seems like my virtual machine, there are a lot of work to be done from security perspective. I need to enable disk encryption. I need to install endpoint protection. I need to install a vulnerability assessment solution on the VMs. There are some recommendations on my web app, on my function app, etc. I can go to individual resources at the granular level if I want to by navigating to their own respective section and then navigating to each and every VM. So for example, I navigate to VMs and computers. From here, I can manage the actual virtual machines. I can navigate to each and individual virtual machine and then see from policy standpoint, from compliance standpoint, what are the different things that I'm missing. So for example, it says here that you haven't installed the endpoint protection solution on virtual machine. This is one of the false positive that is there. And Microsoft is trying to add multiple endpoint protection solutions, like McAfee is now in preview. From the customers, this is one of the complaints that I received. This is the practical knowledge that I am giving you, that they had installed McAfee, but still they were, the system was saying that the endpoint protection is not enabled on the virtual machine. There is a way to disable this recommendation. We'll see that shortly. But let's see, if it says that this disk encryption on the virtual machine is not enabled, how can we do that? I click on this recommendation. It gives me all the information I need. It tells me that these are the remediation steps. It gives me the link to appropriate article. If I click on it, it opens up in a new tab that gives me step-by-step guidance on how to enable the encryption on the VM. So it will show me how the VM will look like, and it will give me the multiple scenarios, how you can bring your own key, how you can encrypt using the default key, what are the different scenarios, how you can encrypt the whole disks for your virtual machines in your environment. Once I'll take action, this event will automatically be resolved and it will start showing green. It will start coming up in the past assessments. So what passed, you can review all those here. These are the things that it had already looked at, and these are the things for which the status is already healthy in the security center. So similarly, you can navigate the secure score for networking, for your data and storage, for identity and access. We'll look at these events when we look at the resource security hygiene. But let's look at the security policy. Security policy is what determines what Azure Security Center checks in your environment. So you can access that in here, and then you can go into your subscription to modify that security policy. It shows you what it is checking. It shows you what are the different items it is checking for. Now, I can click on this particular link, ASC Azure Security Center default policy. And once it loads, I can start modifying the different constructs in this particular policy. I can change the scope of this policy. I can change whether a particular item in this policy is checked in your environment or it should be disabled. For example, the monitoring endpoint protection, I can disable that right here, and then that will not be checked. All the false positives in environment, they will all be weeded out. I'll only get the recommendations that I'm interested in. I'll not get the recommendations, for example, monetary vulnerability assessment. I have a third-party system. I'm not using Microsoft system, so I can disable this. I know that I'm compliant. I can get the report from the McAfee system, for example. So I do not need this assessment. Once you are done, you can save this particular policy. So for now, we'll not take any action on this. And then another thing inside the security policy screen is you can select your data sources from where the data is coming. You can do that by going into edit settings. And then you can do that from the data collection. Auto provisioning means that the MMA agent that we were talking about, the Microsoft monitoring agent, it will automatically be installed on all the virtual machines in your environment. So it will automatically use a workspace. Workspace is your log analytics workspace where it records all the events. We'll look at the architecture later on, but all the events from your virtual machine, they all come into that workspace. And then from the workspace, Azure Security Center looks at those events, provides some intelligence, threat detection, and then gives you the recommendations. Not just for the Security Center default. If you have additional workspace in your environment, you can edit the settings for those as well. And the setting for the data collection, they look similar. You can specify what kind of events Security Center should be looking at. By default, it is all events, and I recommend that you leave it at default unless until you want to look at particular specific events in your environment. Now, regulatory compliance is what we briefly looked at, but here is the detail for the same. This is where you look at whether you're compliant to any of the standards. For example, ISO 27001. If you have to be compliant with cryptography A10 standard under ISO 27000, right now we are not compliant. It is showing as red. So what I need to do to get compliance? So I can drill down into that standard, and then I can see which of the resources are not conforming to the cryptography standard as outlined in the ISO 27001 security standard. And then right from here, as we saw earlier, I can take that action. I can click on each and every recommendation from here as well, and then I can take the action as we saw earlier from here. So this gives you a different view of the same secure score that we were seeing earlier, but from the perspective of the regulatory compliance. Next, we look at the resource security hygiene. Now, the earlier thing, we were looking at the same recommendations, but from the perspective of policy and compliance. Here, we are looking from the perspective of individual granular resource level. Whether my resources are secure or not, that's what we are looking here. The very first recommendation is to enable the MFA for accounts. This is the same recommendation we were looking at policy, but this is from the security perspective, from security hygiene of your whole environment. We're not looking at any compliance, any regulatory standard, but to the actual security hygiene of the environment. So you can delve deep into each and every section. Or what I can do is, if I want to focus on a particular section, then I can go into that particular section from the left. And see the recommendations related to that particular section only. So just like before, we can go to the VMs and computers. I can navigate to each and individual resource, and then I can look at each and individual recommendation for that particular resource at the granular level. Let's look at some of the other recommendations that are there in the environment. I'll go to app
Hey,
services.
Aman. Got a couple quick questions, if that's all right.
Sure.
They're about specific compliance standards. Do you happen to know if the Security Center can check compliance against NIST 800, 53, or IRS 1075? Or is there a list somewhere that people can see what compliance standards are available?
I believe the answer is no, but to be honest, off the top of my head, I don't know definitively. These are the 4 standards that Microsoft is currently providing that they look at. It is the categorization of the security policies into these standards. I believe the standards that you mentioned, they are not there, but I can look that up and provide the answer later on.
Great, thanks.
So moving back to the security constructs, let's look at some of the ones for app service. So this is the web app service. 2 of the recommendations that it is saying is that web application should only be accessible over HTTPS. This is very important for us. We do not want any HTTP traffic. We want the standard to be HTTPS only. And for some resources like this one, it will even give you the option to take an action. When I do that, it will not just take me to that resource, but it will take me to that resource per appropriate setting from where I can enable that property. So I change this to on, and once I do that, I can come back, and after some time, this particular recommendation will go away. Second recommendation it is giving me is that remote debugging should be turned off for the web app. Again, I can take action on this one as well. And in here, it takes me to the application settings for the web app. And there is a setting for remote debugging. I can turn that off. I want to enable that when I'm developing the web app, when I'm doing a remote debugging on the web app, but in my production environment, I do not want this enabled. I definitely want this removed so that anybody else, a malicious user, should not be able to come into my environment and try to connect to my web app through the remote debugging feature. And then you can look at the past assessment that the cross object resource access that is not enabled for every resource. Similarly, function app behind the scene, it is an app service. So similar recommendations will be available for this one. And then for this one, the remote debugging was not enabled, so it was already healthy. The HTTPS is not enabled, so access should only be over HTTPS. So I can enable that in here. I can view containers if they were there. I can view the security related recommendations for the containers and other compute resources like logic apps or event hub in my environment as well. If I had any VM skill sets, I can view those as well. So VM skill sets, containers, and other compute resources, they are right now in preview. Every day, new features are being added to the Azure portal, to the Security Center as well. Next, I can go to the networking. So in here, I can view all the recommendations, or I can go to individual virtual networks. For example, this is the virtual network being leveraged by my virtual machine. Then within this virtual network, the network itself is, there is no recommendation for the network itself, but the subnet where my virtual machines are actually connected, that has a recommendation. So I can navigate to the subnet then and see what that recommendation is. There is no network security group at subnet. If you don't know what network security group is, that is kind of like a firewall on your subnet. Through network security group, you provide the combination of IP address and port and specify for inbound communication, what should be allowed. For outbound communication, what are the rules, what is allowed. So you can do that at the subnet level. Microsoft recommends that you do it. Unless until you have a third-party virtual appliance, this is what is recommended by default in your the whole environment. This is from the networking perspective. Then from the data and storage perspective, since we have a SQL database in the environment, as well as a storage account in the environment, so you can navigate to your individual databases, and you can see that at the server level, you have two recommendations. You should provision an Azure AD administrator for the SQL Server. You should enable auditing at the SQL Server. Now, SQL itself has multiple constructs to provide security for your whole environment. SQL itself has its own firewall through which you can enable access to particular IP addresses. Why that firewall is not in these recommendations, I did not configure that firewall, but still it is not in these recommendations because the default rule on that firewall is everything is blocked. So only the access to the IP addresses that you configure, only that will be allowed. I can drill deep into my databases and see the recommendations for database level as well. I can click on one of the database, click on take action, just to show you if you are interested from the database section, what can be configured here. So from vulnerability assessment, there are multiple items. So it says that the sensitive data columns should be classified. DBA user should not be used for normal service operations, which seems like it is. The master related recommendations, I can take action on those as well, but my individual database is what I'm definitely interested in. So the overall recommendation is you should enable audit and threat detection on your SQL databases. If you are having a SQL database in the production environment, you should not have a Azure SQL database without having audit and threat detection enabled on it. The data at rest in a SQL database is automatically encrypted by using TDE, transparent data encryption. Lastly, I can go into the storage account and I can see what are the recommendations. You need to ensure that you use secure transfer to send anything to the secure account, the storage account, and you need to restrict access. There is firewall and virtual network configuration on the storage account as well that you can leverage to restrict the access. Another thing is you should use always SAS tokens to allow access to your storage accounts. Identity and access is something that we have already checked when we were checking the Azure Active Directory Secure Score. These are the same recommendations or similar recommendations that you should enable MFA, you should remove external accounts with owner permission, and you should enable diagnostic logs in Key Vault. I'll talk about Key Vault in a short while. But this in a nutshell is how you can inspect your different security recommendations for different resources at the granular level and then take action on those recommendations. The adaptive controls, the advanced cloud defense that we talked about is also here that you can configure. We'll not go into the details in the interest of time, but from here you can provide whitelisted apps. If there are any apps on the virtual machines, it can detect those. Through just-in-time VM access, you can configure access on the VMs that, for example, the RDP will only be open for an hour, and then everything will go back to getting blocked. File integrity monitoring is what I was talking about. This is the latest addition from Microsoft that it can check the virtual machines, the different systems in your environment, and then monitor the file integrity of the systems. From threat protection, if there are security level events, only then the data will come here. And then you can have custom alert rules. You can have security alert map that can show you in a map, in a live scenario, from where the security alert is coming in, what is happening from the security perspective. Playbooks is what we were talking about earlier. So here you can add logic app-based workflows or playbooks. through which you can have multiple workflows. So what kind of workflows we can have? Let's conclude the demo here and go back to the presentation to look at some of the workflows that you can configure in your environment. Using the playbooks or logic apps, you can route the alerts to a particular ticketing system in your environment. Normally, I have seen with multiple customers, they will not be using Security Center as an active system. So you can route the alerts to your system, to your ticketing system by using those particular playbooks. You can gather additional information from here. One event occurs, you can gather information for the related event using a different playbook. You can apply additional security controls. You can ask a user to validate an action. You can block a suspicious user account. You can restrict the traffic right from there in an automated fashion. A security event occurs, it gets tracked, a playbook is triggered automatically, and then that restricts the traffic from the IP address of the known address from where that security event is being generated. So that attacks like DDoS, the denial of service, they can be prevented. So let's talk about a little bit about money related to Security Center. There is a free tier which has a lot of recommendations, lot of security policy assessments. It also provides you with connected partner solutions. There is no included data. You are charged for the data based on your log analytics workspace, but there is not much that is available. For the standard solution that is there, you have hybrid solution as well, but you are charged with a price tag of $15 per node per month. So I would consider Security Center for sure, but you need to consider the pricing of it. How many nodes are there? How actively are you using this particular system? How much and rich you are as far as your usage of Azure is concerned? If you are working in a hybrid scenario, that means you have resources both on-prem and in Azure, and you have majority of your workloads on-prem, then you would be able to get away with free resources. But once you start building production resources in Azure or start migrating your workloads into Azure, I would highly recommend going through the standard tier. It is worth the price in the longer run. So this is the general architecture. You have your on-premises data center, you have Azure data center. The data comes into log analytics, and then you can export the data into Excel or Power BI. The data is checked by the security analytics, threat detection, or prescriptive recommendation through Microsoft's proprietary threat intelligence. Data also comes through networking, through different PaaS services, and then all the data is collated in the log analytics. And that is what we were seeing in the Azure Security Center. Those were the insights. Those were the curated insights that we were seeing in the Azure Security Center. Finally, what are the other security considerations that you should be looking at? Azure Security Center gives you the recommendations at the individual resource level, but you can go directly to those resources as well. So other things from security perspective that you should be delving into, and there could be a whole hour-long session onto each and every topic. But just to touch base from the completion perspective, you should always follow the principle of least privilege. You should use role-based access control in Azure to give the access only to the resources that is required. You should use Key Vault, which is Azure Key Vault service, to store any sensitive information. As we talked about MFA, you should use that to add additional layer of security. Cloud App Security is another offering from Microsoft. It's Microsoft's CASB solution. This offering provides you insights into shadow IT. Let's say an end user, they share a particular sensitive document using OneDrive. You can't get insight into that. Cloud App Security is what gives you insight into that shadow IT. Microsoft acquired this solution from a third-party vendor, and then they are providing it as a Cloud App Security. Another considerations are that you should use Azure Information Protection to categorize the data. You can categorize particular Word documents in your environment as sensitive. And then if anybody will try to share those documents, the sharing operation can be blocked, or even the user access can be blocked. Finally, your application architecture, it also has a key role to play in the whole security posture. You should follow proper design patterns. There is a new offering, Azure Sentinel, which gels closely with Azure Security Center. It provides you with near real-time advanced AI and security analysis of your environment. It is cloud-native CM. So the questions that we posed earlier for the demo scenario, these are the answers. To limit access, we would use Azure AD conditional access. A single pane of glass is the security center through which we can view the whole security posture of the environment. To control access to individual resources, we can still use Security Center to get granular control. You can even go to the resource themselves and take actions on those resources. To restrict access to only required resources, you can use RPAC. Azure Key Vaults is what is there to store any confidential information like your connection strings and username passwords, etc. Backup and setting up geo-replication is what is highly recommended for your VMs, for your different resources like SQL databases, to prevent against ransomware attacks. If your original VM is compromised, you can still recreate the VM using the backup or your geo-replicated VM. At the end, these are some of the resources that can help you get started. And that concludes the session for today. Back to you, Joe.
Great. Thanks, Aman. I do have just one other question, and that is, if I'm already using another agent like System Center Operations Manager, can I still use the Azure Security Center?
Absolutely. So System Center Operations Manager, that can send the data directly into OMS, which is your log analytics workspace. And from there, the data can be ingested and reported through Security Center. So SCOM has inbuilt integration with the OMS log analytics workspace. You can leverage that.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for showing up. We will be sending out a recording, as I mentioned, and I'm going to throw up Aman's info here, just in case you have any questions you think of later. So yeah, thanks.
Happy Friday, everyone.